Why did they invent white people? Everyone knows that white people were racist for a really long time. White people would buy, breed, and sell black humans the same way they did other livestock. Whites have been regularly invading Africa and taking people to use as slaves since at least the time of the Romans' invasion of Carthage. White people, we assume, have a history and hatred that goes as so far back it would be easy to blame belief in race superiority on evolution. With whites not marrying or working or integrating with blacks until the modern civil rights era. Except white people didn't exist during the time of Rome. White people didn't exist during Byzantium, Charlemagne, or even the Plymouth colony. Whites were invented in Virginia in the 1680s. Before that, people saw each other as laborers or stock owners. Stock at the time was livestock. The most valuable was often human livestock. Whites and blacks, they just didn't exist. But nationality did. An Englishman, for example, had more hate for a Frenchman than either had for a Kenyan. Creating white people meant creating a history of white people. And since history has no white people, our schools just allow us to assume that before 1681, the history was full of them. But it isn't. White and black people, for example, didn't exist in 1630s Virginia, even though half the population were indentured servants. These white and black people were of a myriad of origins, skin colors, languages. They would work for 7 years and then they were given some goods and land and allowed to buy their own stock, livestock, often human livestock. Put simply, white people in history books seem to have existed and seem to have always been white supremacists, but it's just not true. White people probably feel like they just got a worldview gut punch. So let me say what I was thinking when I learned this. But whites can't have been invented. From Rome to the British Empire, we see white people through history enslaving blacks. Yes, we do. We see that. The people of the time saw Romans enslaving Africans and the British enslaving Nigerians. People from the island of Britannia were no more Roman than Italians are British. White people were invented in the late 1600s. Before that, white and black people worked together, ate together, and married each other without reservation. Whites and blacks were equally free, with equal rights and equal opportunity. White and black men had a right to vote. White women were married, in some places, to half of the black men. Whites did not exist. So everyone had equal rights. Whites started to emerge in 1664 when a new law enslaved free British women and their children if they married an African origin slave. In response to this law, the stock owners encouraged those marriages because such marriages would mean there would be even more human livestock for them. White people in 1664 still didn't exist in the law. Instead, the focus was on national origin. Whites entered the world in 1680 when the law was updated to punish stock owners, priests, and most of all, black men and white women. White men were also banned from marrying black women, just like black men were banned from marrying white women. But this was rarely punished. Instead, the intent of the law was to allow white men to have mates by denying mates to non-white men. White male dominance became law after Bacon's Rebellion. Just before whites were created, Bacon's Rebellion had unified free laborers and servants against stock owners. And while British troops put down the rebellion a year later, it scared the ruling elite. Thus, they invented whites. Virginia lawmakers said in letters at the time, the invention of whites was to divide and conquer the laboring class. Now, whites were no longer to be equal with other freed persons. White people were given more and more privilege. It started with taking women away from blacks. White men were then given guns, land, and ammo when they were freed from servitude, while blacks were banned from owning guns. White men were then given exclusive right to testify against whites. White stock owners could therefore illegally enslave black servants without fear of being testified against. White people gained privilege. White men gained guns to enforce their power over women. Blacks were denied guns and unable to protect their women. White people were immune from blacks in court. Whites reigned supreme. White supremacy created a middle class of white men, not by elevating whites, but by subjugating blacks. White supremacy led to a world where many think they have more in common with Ivanka Trump than their black coworker. People can learn to stop being racist, and for the most part, they have. White people and black people, however, can't learn to stop being part of a white supremacist culture. White supremacy is real. White people still marry mostly whites. White men still own most of the guns. And whites still fight to maintain the wealth of stock owners. White supremacy is why Philando Castillo, just saying gun, could lead a cop to shoot him and a jury to acquit the cop. White supremacy is why the middle class buy into a retirement program based on stock ownership. White supremacy makes white people emotionally fragile and weak when they see the consequences of white supremacy. For example, by responding to Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter. White supremacy is why, for the same crime rate in a neighborhood, black citizens are 7 times more likely to be arrested, tried, and convicted. White supremacy can be abolished, and white people can help. White supremacy can be abolished by banning patrolmen from carrying guns. The white supremacist culture is enforced by patrol persons of all kinds, and guns are the traditional means of enforcing it. White supremacy can be abolished by funding all schools equally and guaranteeing every high school graduate a right to a higher education or trade school. This is not a partisan set of suggestions. We have this tendency to look at anyone more than one standard deviation away as though the most caricatured, loudest voice represents everyone on that side. But if the right and the left sat down to talk about white supremacy, we would find that whatever our opinions on most other issues, we are one people at heart in wanting to end white supremacy. The difference between workers on the right and left is in the invention of whiteness. The British divided the minority from the majority skin color, gave privilege to the majority skin color, and then told that skin color that they are in a fragile situation and they must defend against the minority skin color. And in some truly destructive ways, both sides are still buying into that narrative. Since the creation of whiteness is what created blackness, the path forward isn't for blacks to act more white. It's for us to all abolish white supremacy. White people who wish to live in a world that sees color no different than hair color, that sees being black as no different than being Irish or Italian, they have it mostly right. It's the right place to be eventually. But for now, it's a matter of fact that it's not where we are. We can do it. We can abolish white supremacy. You've joined me on a journey to understand why white people were invented. We've discovered that they were invented to divide workers from each other to protect the wealth of stock owners. We've seen that the history of white supremacy continues on today, and we've learned disarming patrolmen and giving everyone hope for an education that leads to a well-paying career. We can abolish the white supremacy this nation is founded on. See my lectures as they come out by clicking subscribe and clicking on the bell, then clicking all. If you want to dig deeper, stay here and listen in as I talk with some colleagues about the scientific evidence I've based this lecture on.